A year ago, I said the Steam Deck achieved perfect balance, and now with the ROG Ally X being released today, I think I need to revisit that sentiment. In other news, it looks like the honeymoon is over. Despite being one of the Steam Deck's biggest supporters, Sony appears to be giving up on the deck and Linux gaming experience in general. Is anything of value lost? Is Sony planning to go head to head against the Steam Deck? We'll get into that and what the next steps are going to be for Valve and for Sony. Meanwhile, Valve has been doing impressive things to improve the performance of the Steam Deck. Let's discuss all of that and more in today's Deck News Roundup. Be sure to leave a like and a sub on my way to 100K. Alright, the Ally X is officially released as of today. I've had almost a month with this device, and I think what I have to say is going to be a surprise to at least a few of you. Over a year ago, I made a video titled Steam Deck versus Everyone, Numbers Aren't Everything. In that video, I talked about something that I need to revisit now. Yeah, maybe you see where I might be going with this. So in that video, I said that the Steam Deck made all the right trade-offs and achieved a sort of perfect balance. Well, recently I've been thinking about that a lot because I think the Ally X also accomplished the same thing. You might look at the specs and think that Asus just sort of brute forced some things like the 80 watt-hour battery and the 24 gigs of RAM, but I think that undersells some of the finesse that Asus was able to accomplish with this handheld. The battery is twice the size, but the Ally X is far from heavy. In fact, it's under 700 grams and well balanced. It feels great. Despite being the same chipset, Asus was able to reduce overall power draw and you end up with more than 2 times battery life. This is what I mean when I say numbers aren't everything. Specs on a spec sheet are great, but a machine is more than just the sum of its parts. Doubling the battery capacity is awesome, but it's even better when they find a way to offset the newly added weight and they manage to reduce the overall power draw so that it's more efficient too. I've had a few people try to tell me that between the Steam Deck OLED and the ROG Ally X, that one of these handhelds is objectively better than the other. This is of course coming from people that haven't even tried the ROG Ally X. That much is clear considering the fact that the ROG Ally X just released today, but it's also clear because they're usually just referring to specs. 24 gigs of RAM is better than 16 gigs of RAM after all, right? But if specs alone determined what was best, then the Vita would have outsold the Nintendo DS. There are a lot of things that go into great gaming hardware, including specs, library, and overall gaming experience. Personally, the Steam Deck OLED and the ROG Ally X are 2 of the best PC handhelds that you can get for the money, and you probably know which one of these 2 is the better fit for you. I did decide not to make a formal review video, and I'll tell you why in a bit, but honestly, I've just been really happy with the Ally X, the same way I was happy with the Steam Deck LCD and the Steam Deck OLED. In fact, after installing Bazzite, I feel like I have what is essentially a Steam Deck Pro for me. It can play games at 1080p, it has great high-end performance, it has awesome battery life even on low-end games, even though the Steam Deck OLED is still better for low-end games. I also love how it feels in my hands, and now with Bazzite, I don't have to lose the SteamOS experience that I really do enjoy so much. The Bazzite devs are still working on improving support for the Ally X, but version 3.6 is boasting day 0 support for the Asus ROG Ally X, and I'm happy to say that I had a small part in making that happen. Normally, Bazzite devs don't have advanced access to hardware, but instead of working on a review, I spent a lot of my time with the Ally X providing bug reports to a few devs. They were incredibly quick at making fixes, and now Bazzite is at the point where it works really well with the Ally X. There is still one nasty bug where sometimes the controllers do not reconnect after a suspend resume, but the devs are aware and are looking to fix it as soon as they can. Hopefully, I'll be able to help with that as well. I should also point out that someone from Asus saw my Bazzite video and they wanted to know if there was any way that they could help with the effort, so I put them in contact with the main maintainer of Bazzite, and I truly do hope this is just the beginning. In any case, even if you have no intentions of picking up the ROG Ally X, I think this news should be pretty exciting because, man, imagine how nice the Steam Deck 2 is going to be. Imagine a handheld on Zen 5 or even Zen 6 architecture with an 80 watt-hour battery and 32 gigs of RAM, maybe more. Imagine what SteamOS might look like after a couple more years of development from both Valve and the open source community at large. The future is bright, and I think that the Ally X is proof of that. More than anyone else, Asus has been hot on the heels of the Steam Deck Deck, and they really proved that they want to be taken seriously in this space. When Valve first released the Steam Deck OLED, many of us were gushing about how they were able to improve so much, even though they didn't change the chipset. I can now say that I think Asus accomplished the same thing with the ROG Ally X. Now, a few of you may be wondering why you're not seeing a proper ROG Ally X review from my channel today, the day that the embargo lifts. Well, the truth is there are so many YouTubers releasing reviews today that honestly I just felt like my review was going to get lost in the mix. Some of my buddies like the Fox, Retro Game Core, and Nerd Nest are working on excellent reviews, so I'm going to leave links to those in the description. Normally I suppose that sort of YouTube meat grinder would be just fine. It's the cost of doing business after all, but there were two more things that kept me from doing a review. First, I spent a lot of time on the ROG Ally X video, and I didn't think I had it in me to do another in-depth video like that so soon. Second, I feel like I'm in this honeymoon period with the Ally X, partially because I almost feel forced to use this as my main device while I have to review it. So instead, I'm going to do something a little bit strange. I'm going to take some time to intentionally not review the Ally X. Over the next few weeks or months, I'm going to see which handheld I gravitate to more, and I want to talk about that experience because I think that's going to be a unique perspective. In the meantime, I'm going to be just like many of you all and enjoy all the wonderful reviews that are dropping today. Next, let's move to the Sony story. From the very beginning, Sony has been a big supporter of the Steam Deck. The Steam Deck launched with the back catalog of PlayStation PC games not only being compatible, but playing surprisingly well on the deck. Days Gone in particular played incredibly well, and while Horizon Zero Dawn has had issues the further you progress in the game, the initial performance was surprising for a handheld to say the least. Then God of War 2018 was ported to PC in early 2022, and not only did it play great, it was consistently in the top most played Steam Deck games. Even now it's in the top played deck games, as is Horizon Zero Dawn. Next was Spider-Man, and that rocketed to becoming Sony's best-selling game on PC yet, with it too becoming one of the top played games on deck. Then, almost as if Sony wanted to capitalize on the success of the previous games on the Steam Deck, Sony started advertising how well upcoming PlayStation games played on PC handhelds. The biggest example being Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart, which still says on the store page that you can tailor a variety of graphics quality options to a range of devices from high-end PCs to portable PC gaming devices. The fact that this was so scalable was even used as fodder in console wars as a sort of proof that Sony was perhaps exaggerating when they said that this game was not possible to make on the PS4. Nonetheless, I think it's safe to say that the honeymoon period between Sony and Steam Deck peaked with Helldivers 2, which released earlier this year and not only became Sony's best-selling game on PC, but did so by a ridiculous margin. No other game even comes close. Unfortunately, that's where the honeymoon ends because it was only a few months later that Sony seemingly tried to shoehorn in the PlayStation overlay for that game. The PC audience fought back and Sony seemed like they relented, but that brings us essentially to present day. Sony has since added the PlayStation overlay to 2 of their 3 subsequent releases since then, with the new open beta for Concord being the latest culprit. As of right now, this overlay is needed for multiplayer, but it is also completely incompatible with the Steam Deck. Concord, of course, is the game that's been getting a lot of hate for a variety of reasons, most notably because it's a hero shooter that feels like it's not bringing anything new to the table. Now, to be clear, I'm not very interested in games as a service games, so Concord is not likely to be a game that I was going to buy anyway, but this pattern of Sony's is alarming and it seems inevitable that it's going to creep into more and more of their single-player games. The beta for Concord was available initially as a bonus for pre-ordering, but as of July 19th, it is now an open beta that you can just request access to. If you try to run it on your Steam Deck, you'll see a message that specifically says Wine, Proton, and Steam Deck are not supported by this application. This is a message that Sony tailored, so it's clear that they're intentionally not supporting Linux gaming with the PlayStation overlay, but the reason why is still unclear. This has been discussed in the issues tracker on the Proton GitHub, and I think this person summarized the issue well, saying that PS overlay is considered an unsupported anti-cheat by Valve. It even contains an error data about how Proton is explicitly not supported. It's highly likely that Sony has chosen to manually block it, or that it relies on things Wine cannot do, for example kernel level stuff. So even though Sony's reasoning for this move seems unclear, what does seem evident is that they're not as keen on supporting the Steam Deck as they once were. The likely truth is that the more Sony embraces the PC as a viable platform, the more they're going to want to control how those games are played. And while they may not be against the Steam Deck specifically, I suspect that they're going to want to try to establish a presence that is independent of Steam and independent of Valve. The rumors that they're working with AMD on a handheld of their own comes to mind as well. It's a bit far-fetched, but could you imagine Sony preparing a PC ecosystem of their own, perhaps even one that includes a Sony-branded PC handheld? And if that's the case, how does that change their relationship with Valve? For now, the PlayStation PC brand depends on the Steam store to succeed. Helldivers 2 wouldn't get anywhere near the acclaim that it got without the PC platform and without Steam. But one thing that was made clear by some of the recent Valve leaks is that Xbox isn't the only competition that PlayStation has to worry about, and it's not even the biggest threat to PlayStation's success. PC gaming has been becoming more and more prominent, while the overall home console market seems to be shrinking by at least a little bit. Sony is looking to the PC to help grow their audience, but I suspect they don't want to lose the control that they're so used to. Being one of the most private companies in the gaming industry, it's impossible to know what Valve is thinking about all of this. But as with the state of anti-cheat on Steam Deck, Valve seems content with the knowledge that they've done everything they can do. They've labeled Ghost of Tsushima as unsupported on deck, despite the fact that the single-player portion plays surprisingly well. Likewise, it should be a foregone conclusion at this point that Concord will also be labeled unsupported on deck. I don't really see Valve trying to court Sony any more than they've already done, but this may all not matter because other than maybe Bloodborne, how many of you feel like you're currently waiting for an upcoming Sony game to be ported to PC? This is something I've really been curious about because for me, I've already gotten most of the ports that I was looking forward to. If there is a Sony game that you're looking forward to, definitely leave a comment so I can learn more and maybe we can discuss it. In other Steam Deck news, Proton has recently seen some significant improvements. One thing that Valve understands better than Sony or Nintendo is that it's important for them to maintain and take care of Steam's back catalog. Valve knows that a lot of the value in Steam is in players feeling secure that you don't have to buy a new re-release to play an old game. You can often even install mods to modernize older games in one way or another. This is especially nice so that when a company like Take-Two releases a botched remaster like GTA Trilogy Definitive Edition, well, you can still play the older games on your PC as long as you bought them before they were delisted. The difficulty here is that sometimes vendors like Microsoft will not keep up with support of APIs that were used in those games, like in this case Direct3D 8. This is where the open source community comes in, and sometimes with corporate backing from companies like Valve. In this case, Direct3D 8 got significant performance improvements on Linux and technically in Windows too, thanks to a project called D8VK, which got merged into DXVK. D8VK is a project that translates Direct3D 8 API calls to Vulkan API calls, and the team just celebrated its definitive 1.0 release with the widest possible support for Direct3D 8 games and apps on Linux. In the release notes, they also say this is the first production-ready release of D8VK that has been tested against many hundreds of games with better performance and compatibility than is possible with Wine D3D or D3D 8 to 9. They also provide a list of detailed benchmark tests to corroborate those claims. Although these games perform well on hardware like the Steam Deck, one of the big benefits to something like this is that it also extends the battery life. Better performance translates to better efficiency, which means that these games can run at lower TDPs. Of course, this is all specifically helpful if you actually own some of those Direct3D 8 games, so I will leave a link in the description to a list of those games, but it does include titles like Morrowind, the trilogy of the GTA 3 games, Crazy Taxi, Sonic Adventure DX, Splinter Cell Chaos Theory, Max Payne 1 and 2. It also includes SWAT 4, which is not on Steam, and I've yet to play it, but I've heard such amazing things about it that I really do want to play this game. Basically, Direct3D 8 has a lot of games from the OG Xbox era, so definitely let me know which one of those you're interested in playing. On top of that, there have been some other improvements to Proton and Proton GE as well. If you own Elden Ring but you don't own the Shadow of the Erdtree DLC, then you might have noticed that multiplayer was broken for you. Thankfully, if this was plaguing you, then you can now try Proton GE 9-10 and that should fix the problem. The most recent update to Proton Experimental is a big one too. It improved memory usage for Burnout Paradise Remastered, which is awesome considering how good that game is. It also makes King of Fighters 13 playable. That was a great game and perhaps the end of an era for being one of the last great fighters with pixel art. I should also point out that there are fixes to Shadow Warrior 2 and the 2009 release of Bionic Commando. Finally, Valve also deployed a fix for videos that were missing in Riven. This is an awesome remake, by the way. The environments look wonderful and impressively similar to the original renders. It also got over 90% positive reviews on Steam, so that might be worth a look as well. As you likely remember, Valve recently added a new game recording feature to Steam. One of the unique things about their game recording feature is that even though basic recording works automatically, this also comes with a very cool timeline interface that allows games to programmatically add more information to the recorded timeline. At least that's how it was explained by Durante, the founder of the studio that helped with the PC port of Trails Through Daybreak, an action RPG developed by the venerable Nihon Falcom. Durante explained this because this game is now one of the first games to support the Steam recording timeline. He says the timeline mode is set according to whether you're in battle, in menus, loading, or just playing the game normally. You'll see this in the way that the timeline is either colored or shaded. Likewise, the timeline description is derived from the name of the in-game area that you currently are in. And finally, a number of different events will be marked, including the start and end of battles, as well as interactions like talking to characters, shopping, opening treasure, S-breaks, and more. These are going to show up as icons in the timeline that will make it easier to scrub about. On that same token, SteamDB.info has added a new way to find games that support Steam recording timeline, and you can see now that it's no longer just the 3 Valve games that support this feature, but 17 games that do. Pretty cool. Finally, I have a message for longtime viewers. While I was learning some new editing software, I unfortunately did not have my proper outro with my outro music and my Patreon supporters. I'm happy to say that it's back. I hope you enjoy. Shout out to folks like Geohazard, Christian, Dominique, Alex92, Cesare VM, and DeckFilter.app who are recent subscribers. I really do appreciate you. And if you want your name in the credits, feel free to check out my Patreon link in the description. All right, I hope you're all having a wonderful week. Deck Gang out. Goodbye.